Ever heard of like the stories where a diver surfaces miles away from their dive boat and they're like totally disoriented, have no idea how they got there? Yeah, that's usually the work of currents, that invisible hand of the ocean, right? And they can turn out what should be a routine dive into like a survival situation. So today we're taking a deep dive request, literally. We're talking about unexpected underwater dangers. You sent us some really interesting stuff on this, and honestly, some of it surprised even me. We're going beyond the typical watch out for sharks advice here, right? We're getting into like the nitty-gritty of what can go wrong down there, even for experienced divers. So let's start with those unpredictable currents. What makes them so dangerous? Especially like you think you know a dive site. You've been there a million times.
It boils down to the sheer power of water. Something a lot of people underestimate. It's way denser than air, so even what seems like a gentle current, it can really pack a punch. Imagine trying to walk against a really strong wind.
Oh, yeah.
Now picture that same force, but you're underwater, way more buoyant, less stable.
And you can't just like plant your feet and take a break, right? Now, the stuff you sent mentioned a diver who had to like cling to a reef for dear life because a current changed so suddenly. Have you ever encountered anything like that?
I haven't personally had to hug a reef, thankfully, but I have felt how quickly currents can shift. 1 minute you're fitting along, no problem. The next you're fighting just to stay put. That's why, that point about checking tide and current forecasts, absolutely crucial. It's your weather report, but for underwater.
It's true. It's like currents have their own weather patterns, but you can't see them until you're like right in the middle of it. And speaking of which, how can you even tell if you're caught in a current down there? Are there like visual cues or something?
Oh, absolutely. There's some telltale signs. One is to look at how fixed objects are behaving, like coral rocks. Are they swaying? If they're bending, moving in a particular direction consistently, you're probably in a current. Another thing is pay attention to your air consumption. Find yourself working harder, using more air just to stay in the same place. Current might be the culprit.
Air consumption. Never thought of that as an indicator. Okay, so you realize, I'm in a current. What's the best course of action?
Yeah, the absolute worst thing you can do is try to muscle your way against a current. You'll wear yourself out, potentially make things worse. Trying to swim perpendicular to the current, aim for the edge where it's weaker.
So kind of like sidestepping a runaway train instead of trying to stop it head on?
Exactly. You're not going to win in a straight-up fight. You got to outsmart the current, use its force against itself to maneuver to safety.
That's where those reef hooks we read about come in handy, right? Like having a temporary anchor.
Absolutely. A reef hook can be a lifesaver in a strong current, no joke. Secure yourself to a solid point, catch your breath. You can actually think for a second without being swept away.
Okay, so you're exploring a beautiful reef, snapping photos of a sea turtle, and then bam, the water goes from crystal clear to like pea soup. What are the real dangers in that situation, aside from, missing a good photo op?
The biggest thing is you're talking about disorientation, separation. If you can't see where you're going, it's easy to get separated from your buddy, lose track of your depth, even bump into hazards you didn't see coming.
Yeah, it's like driving in thick fog, but you can't exactly pull over and wait it out.
Right.
You gotta surface eventually to breathe.
Yeah.
Not exactly relaxing. Okay, so we've tackled strong currents, sudden visibility changes. Let's get to the part of the deep dive that always makes me a little nervous, the local residents. It's not all friendly dolphins and playful sea turtles down there, is it?
Well, it's important to remember, we're visitors in their world, right? Mm-hmm. And like any homeowner, some marine creatures are more welcoming than others.
And by unwelcoming, we're talking like venomous spines, sharp teeth, that kind of thing. So besides the obvious don't touch anything, any practical tips for avoiding unwanted interactions with the locals?
Observation is key, more than interaction. Admire from a safe distance, but resist that urge to touch, to chase, corner, anything. What might seem like a playful nudge to us could be a threat to them. They have a very different understanding of personal space.
It's like that saying, take only pictures, leave only bubbles, but with like an extra dose of caution. But let's say, hypothetically, a curious octopus mistakes my hand for a tasty crab. Decides to take a nibble. What then?
First, stay calm. Panicking just makes it worse. Ascend slowly, safely. Keep an eye on your buoyancy. Once you're out of the water, you can assess, administer first aid if you know how, seek medical attention, especially if you're not sure what you're dealing with.
Because sometimes a souvenir seashell isn't worth the venom injection, right?
Okay, moving on from creatures that bite to, well, things that snag.
Getting tangled up down there, it's a recipe for disaster. Triggers panic, restricts your movement. If it affects your air supply, your ability to surface, things get serious fast. And panic just makes it harder to think clearly, to work through it.
Oh, that's my biggest fear, getting caught on something and not being able to get free.
Anything you can do to, like, minimize the risk of getting snagged in the first place.
Awareness, that's your best defense. Be mindful of your surroundings, especially in tight spots around wrecks, reefs, lines, debris. It's common there. Fishing lines, loose ropes, even plants, seaweed can snag your gear.
So channel your inner ninja, basically. Glide through the water.
Exactly. The less bumping and dragging you do, the less likely you are to end up tangled.
Now let's talk about the one thing we rely on more than anything else down there. Our gear. It's our lifeline. It can fail. What's the best way to approach equipment maintenance, pre-dive checks, to minimize that risk? It's like, trust your gear, but double check everything. Like, what are some of those pre-dive checks that, could actually save your life?
The source was really spot on about those pre-dive checks. It's not just going through the motions. You got to understand how each thing works. Spot those problems before they're actually problems underwater.
Right, because a leaky O-ring at the surface is one thing, but 30 meters down, whole different story.
Exactly. Air supply, buoyancy compensator, working right, dive computer, test it. Don't forget the little things too, fin straps, mask fit, all that.
And of course, the buddy system. Having someone else glance at your gear, they might catch something you missed.
Huge. Buddy system isn't just about safety. It's peace of mind too, Knowing someone's got your back, you can relax and enjoy the dive more.
Speaking of peace of mind, let's talk about, the mental side of diving. Breathing underwater, weird creatures, it's a lot.
Totally normal to feel a little anxious, especially when you're new to it.
Yeah.
But when that anxiety becomes full-on panic, that's when it gets dangerous. Impairs your judgment.
Have you ever panicked underwater or seen it happen to someone?
I'll admit, early on, I had those moments where that anxiety spikes. The key is catching it early.
Makes sense. You panic, your breathing goes, your heart's racing.
Exactly. Slow, deep breaths. They're your best friend down there. Heart rate slows down, conserves air, and it interrupts that panic.
Like a mini meditation, but you're underwater.
That's it. Regaining control. And diving within your comfort zone, especially when you're still learning to handle those feelings.
Yeah.
Don't push it, especially in tough conditions.
Don't be a hero. Work your way up.
Exactly. And that acronym, remember, stop, breathe, think, act. Feel that panic rising. Stop, breathe, think it through, then act.
It's like a mental reset button for divers. We've covered a lot, but a couple more things we should at least touch on. Rapid weather changes, DCS, even in shallow water, hypothermia. Seems like even when you're prepared, the ocean can still surprise you.
It's true. Nature is unpredictable, especially underwater. Those weather changes, they can whip up strong currents, rough seas, make it dangerous to surface. In DCS, people associate it with deep diving, but it can happen in shallower water too. Got to follow those safety stops.
I never really thought about hypothermia as a risk in warmer water.
Easy to overlook, but even a little drop in body temperature over a long dive, it can happen, especially if you don't have the right thermal protection.
Good reminder to be aware of our bodies, not just what's around us.
Exactly. Listen to your body, listen to your dive computer. Something feels off, don't hesitate to end the dive.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. Knowledge is power, right? It's what keeps us safe down there. Any final words of wisdom for our listeners before their next underwater adventure?
Enjoy the ocean, it's amazing, but respect is key. The more you know about the dangers, how to handle them, the safer and more fun your dives will be.
Absolutely. Respect the ocean, the creatures in it, and respect your own limits. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into unexpected underwater dangers. Until next time, dive safe.